David pressed his trembling hand against the keyboard, whispering, "This can't be real." His eyes darted across the contract file on the glowing monitor, each signature a cruel echo of his own name. The office was silent, save for the hum of machines, yet the silence felt dangerous. His throat tightened as he scrolled, noticing pages stacked with forged approvals, billions at stake. Sarah, his colleague, had joked earlier about locked folders, but this wasn't a joke anymore. David felt the weight of betrayal, fear twisting into dread. "Why is my name here?" he muttered, his chest pounding. His badge lay on the desk, a symbol of loyalty suddenly turned into a target. Somewhere beyond the glass walls, footsteps echoed in the corridor. He froze, knowing that discovery meant his life at work, and maybe beyond, had just collapsed into fire. The next morning, David's chest still carried the weight of last night's discovery. He walked into the break room, the hum of the coffee machine masking his rapid breaths. Sarah entered, cheerful, asking, "Rough night?" He forced a smile, nodding while gripping his cup tightly. The chatter of colleagues felt distant, their laughter hollow against the storm in his mind. David glanced at the wall clock. Every tick echoed louder than voices. He wanted to confide in Sarah, but fear clamped his throat shut. Instead, he muttered, "Just tired," though his eyes betrayed him. She studied him, her brow furrowed, but turned back to pour her drink. David's thoughts spiraled. If someone saw what he had opened, his badge might not work by evening. His body was present, but his soul stood trapped inside those contracts. Later that day, David entered the conference hall, his heart pounding against his ribs. Executives were gathered at the polished table, their voices sharp, their smiles rehearsed. The air was heavy with cologne and authority. He sank into a chair at the far end unnoticed. "We've secured another contract," announced Mark, the vice president, his voice steady but smug. Applause broke out. Colleagues clapped without question. David's palms dampened. He recognized the name of the company on the screen. It was one of the files carrying his forged signature. The room spun slightly as the applause echoed in his ears. He wanted to shout, but his lips remained sealed, his silence blending with the faceless crowd. He whispered inwardly, "They don't even know I'm the ghost tied to billions." The evening rain tapped against the glass walls as David lingered at his desk, the office nearly deserted. He replayed the conference in his head, the fraudulent company name flashing like a warning siren. His phone buzzed with a message, "Meet me in the garage, urgent." He froze, staring at the screen. Who would call him there at this hour? His pulse raced as he shut the laptop, slipped the phone into his pocket, and walked toward the elevators. Each step echoed against the empty corridor, louder than the storm outside. Shadows bent across the walls, stretching as if alive. He whispered, "This is a mistake," but his legs carried him forward. The underground garage smelled of damp concrete and oil. Dim yellow lights flickered, leaving half the space swallowed in shadow. David stepped cautiously, footsteps echoing, searching for whoever summoned him. "David," a voice whispered sharply from behind a pillar. He spun, pulse surging, to see Sarah half hidden in shadow, her face grave. "You need to be careful," she said, her voice low but urgent. Confusion tightened his brow. "What do you mean?" She glanced around, as if walls carried ears. "I think someone knows you've seen too much." The garage hummed with silence, every flicker of light, a heartbeat closer to danger. David sat at his kitchen table, dawn light filtering weakly through the blinds. His daughter Emma bounced on her chair, asking if he would come to her recital. He forced a smile, saying, "Of course." Inside, panic churned like fire. His wife Laura placed toast before him, studying his hollow eyes. "You didn't sleep," she whispered. David gripped his coffee mug, its warmth failing to steady his hands. The memory of Sarah's warning lingered, pressing against his chest. He wanted to confess, but fear sealed his lips. Laura reached for his hand, eyes pleading for truth, but he only muttered, "It's work." Emma giggled, swinging her feet, oblivious to the storm. For a moment, He let her laughter wash over him, a fragile shield against the darkness waiting outside. The drive to work was suffocating. Rain smeared across the windshield as David clutched the wheel. Emma's backpack rested in the back seat, a reminder of promises he feared he couldn't keep. Laura's voice from earlier echoed in his mind. "You can't keep this inside forever." He gritted his teeth, muttering, "If I speak, they'll destroy us." The city skyline rose ahead, gray and sharp against the storm. Every red light felt like judgment, every horn an accusation. David's reflection in the rearview looked like a stranger, tired, broken, hunted. He tightened his grip, whispering to himself, "Hold it together." The wipers squealed, clearing rain, but nothing cleared the shadow tightening around him. At the office, David slipped into his cubicle, trying to disappear among the endless rows. The chatter of colleagues rose and fell like meaningless static. He noticed Sarah at her desk, typing furiously, her shoulders tense. She didn't look up. He whispered, "Did you send that message last night?" She froze for a moment, then shook her head slightly, eyes fixed on her screen. Fear jolted through him. If not Sarah, then who? He swallowed hard, sinking into his chair, heart hammering. Around him, coworkers laughed at a shared meme, unaware or unwilling to see the cracks spreading beneath. The isolation closed in, the weight of silence pressing harder than any threat. At lunch, David sat alone in the cafeteria, pushing food around his tray. Across the room, clusters of employees laughed, their voices bouncing off the sterile walls. Mark, the vice president, entered, commanding the air without effort. Conversations hushed, then shifted into forced cheer. David stared at his fork, his appetite gone. He whispered, "They'd never believe me against him." Mark's confident stride reminded David of a predator among prey. Sarah walked by, giving him a fleeting glance that carried both pity and warning. He felt like a ghost haunting his own life, unseen yet burdened with truths no one dared to touch. That evening, David sat on the couch, the room dim except for the flicker of television light. Emma curled beside him, head resting on his arm, drifting to sleep. Laura folded laundry nearby, stealing glances at him. He rubbed Emma's shoulder gently, whispering, "I'll always protect you." His voice cracked, betraying the storm inside. Laura spoke softly. "Protecting us doesn't mean carrying this alone." David's throat tightened. He wanted to confess everything, to share the terror of forged signatures and shadows in the hall. Instead, he kissed Emma's forehead and whispered, "It's fine." But the lie tasted bitter, and Laura's eyes told him she knew. David sat at his desk, scanning spreadsheets, numbers blurring into patterns of deceit. He noticed figures that didn't align, contracts with inflated amounts buried under harmless codes. His chest tightened as he whispered, "They're hiding billions." A coworker walked past, giving him a polite nod, unaware of the storm in his screen. He minimized the file instantly, sweat prickling his neck. He wanted to scream the truth, but silence anchored him. Fear became a constant companion, sitting in the chair beside him. He thought of Emma's smile and Laura's worried eyes, and the weight doubled. He whispered, "If I speak, they'll destroy us all." That night, David lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Laura shifted beside him, her soft breathing a reminder of fragile normalcy. The clock ticked mercilessly, each second dragging his mind back to forged contracts and Sarah's warning. He whispered to himself, "I can't keep this up." Laura stirred, half awake, whispering, "You're scaring me, David." He turned his face away, ashamed, unwilling to let her carry his burden. Yet the silence was heavier than words. His chest ached with the truth he swallowed, the truth that threatened to consume him before morning. The next day, whispers spread through the office corridors. David noticed colleagues glancing at him, their conversations halting when he passed. He asked Sarah quietly, "Do you hear it too?" She avoided his gaze, muttering, "Be careful." His heart dropped. Her fear confirmed his paranoia. He sat at his desk, the noise of printers and chatter muffled beneath the drumbeat of dread. He felt their silence more than words, The way the office distanced itself, a silent verdict. David thought bitterly, they've already marked me. At lunch, David sat alone again, his tray untouched. Across the cafeteria, conversations died when he entered. Mark entered the room with a commanding presence, his laugh filling the air like a weapon. David muttered under his breath, he knows. Sarah passed by, dropping her eyes quickly. The silence of colleagues cut deeper than open accusations. Ah. He clenched his fists under the table, whispering, they want me to break before I speak. The walls felt smaller, the cafeteria brighter, the air heavier. He realized he was already becoming invisible in plain sight. That evening, David parked his car outside his house but couldn't step out. He stared at the front door, the warm light glowing inside, a cruel contrast to the storm within him. Emma's laughter faintly reached him through the walls, a melody that should have brought peace but only deepened his guilt. He gripped the steering wheel, whispering, I can't drag them into this. His reflection in the window showed a man torn apart, a father balancing truth against survival. Finally, he whispered, but lies are killing me faster. His body shook as he stepped out into the night air, knowing the walls of safety were beginning to crumble. David entered the records room late at night, his pulse racing. The hum of servers filled the silence as he opened another restricted folder. His breath caught. The fraud ran higher than he imagined. Executives' names, Mark's included, sat signed across falsified contracts. His stomach turned as he whispered, it goes to the top. Suddenly, the door creaked open. He froze, hiding the screen as Sarah stepped in, her face pale. You shouldn't be here, she whispered sharply. Relief flickered, then suspicion. Why was she here at this hour? Her eyes darted to the monitor too quickly. His heart pounded with a new terror. Trust was crumbling. The next day, David confronted Sarah in the parking lot. His voice cracked as he asked, why were you in the records room? She avoided his eyes, saying, I was checking something. Her hesitation cut him deeper than words. He whispered bitterly, you're with them, aren't you? Her lips trembled, but no denial came. Silence said everything. A wave of betrayal hit like a blade. The one person he thought an ally was compromised. He stepped back, shaking, realizing he was more alone than ever. Sarah whispered, I had no choice. But to David, the damage was done. Later, David found a sealed envelope on his desk. No name, no sender. His hands shook as he opened it. Inside were copies of contracts he hadn't touched, with his name forged across every page. His chest tightened. It wasn't just corruption, it was a trap. They weren't just hiding fraud, they were building a case to bury him. He whispered, they're framing me. He glanced around the office. Colleagues typed away, indifferent, but their silence felt suffocating. Each page of the envelope burned his hands like fire. The walls around him had turned into a cage, and he was the bait. That evening, David met Laura in the kitchen, his hands clutching the envelope. He wanted to tell her everything, but words failed. She noticed his trembling and asked softly, what's happening? He said, they're turning me into the villain. Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered, David, please stop before it destroys us. His chest ached, torn between truth and survival. He slammed the envelope on the counter, whispering, if I stop, they win. If I speak, we lose everything. Laura's silence was heavier than argument, her fear etched into the quiet air. The following morning, David's badge failed at the turnstile. He swiped again. Red light blinked cold. His throat closed. A guard approached, voice firm. Step aside. He muttered, there must be a mistake, but deep down he knew. They had moved faster than him. His heart thundered as colleagues walked past, avoiding eye contact, pretending not to see. The betrayal was complete. They hadn't just silenced him, they had erased him. David whispered to himself, it's begun, as the walls of the corporation closed in, swallowing him whole. David sat in the lawyer's office, his hands gripping the edge of the chair. Across the desk, Martin, a sharp-eyed attorney, flipped through the forged contracts. Martin said. "They're framing you to bury the truth." David's voice cracked. "If I testify, they'll destroy my family." Martin leaned forward, eyes unflinching. "If you don't, they'll own your name forever." Silence stretched as the weight of choice pressed down. David clenched his fists, whispering, "Then I fight." His pulse pounded like a war drum, fear and defiance colliding. The moment felt like crossing a line he could never return from. The courtroom buzzed with whispers as David walked to the stand. His legs felt like stone, but his eyes burned with resolve. Laura sat in the gallery, clutching Emma's hand, fear written across her face. Mark sat with polished calm, whispering to lawyers, confident and unshaken. The judge called silence, and David swore the oath, his voice trembling but clear. He thought, "Once I speak, there's no going back." He raised his eyes to the crowded room and whispered inwardly, "This is survival or death." The walls of the courtroom became a stage for his reckoning. David's voice shook as he described the fraud. "Billions stolen, signatures forged, my name used as a weapon." Gasps echoed in the room. Mark smirked faintly, whispering to his attorney. The judge leaned forward, expression grave. David wiped sweat from his brow, continuing, "They set me up, but I will not be silent." Each word carried the weight of his fear and defiance. His hands shook, but his eyes locked on Mark. For the first time, the truth was no longer silent. It filled the air like fire. Mark's attorney rose, voice slicing through the courtroom. "Mr. Carter, isn't it true you signed these contracts willingly?" He held up forged pages, waving them like proof. David's stomach churned, but he forced himself steady. "Those are forgeries," he said firmly. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. The lawyer pressed harder. "Or are you just blaming others to cover your own mistakes?" David's throat burned, but he lifted his voice. "I chose integrity over silence. That's my only mistake." His words landed heavy, cutting through the attorney's polished attack. The tension snapped like a wire pulled too tight. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Reporters scribbled notes, cameras clicked, whispers grew louder. The judge banged the gavel, shouting for order. David's chest heaved, adrenaline rushing through every vein. He looked at Laura and Emma, their faces pale but proud. Mark's mask cracked for the first time, his jaw tightened, eyes dark with fury. David whispered to himself, "No more silence." In that moment, he was no longer a ghost in the system, but a voice that couldn't be erased. The fight was brutal, but truth had finally broken free into the light. The verdict hadn't been delivered, but the scandal had already spilled into headlines. David sat in his living room, television flickering with news anchors declaring fraud investigations. Laura folded her arms, whispering, "You've started a war." David rubbed his temples, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. Emma climbed onto the couch, asking softly, "Daddy, are you in trouble?" His heart cracked, but he forced a smile. "I told the truth," he whispered, though the weight of those words trembled. The family sat in silence, watching his name scroll across the bottom of the screen, their quiet home no longer safe from the world outside. At the office, desks sat abandoned, papers scattered. Investigators moved through hallways, their badges gleaming. David walked past the glass walls, feeling like both survivor and ghost. Some colleagues nodded with silent respect, others turned away, fear in their eyes. Sarah sat frozen at her desk, avoiding him completely. He thought bitterly, their silence is louder than applause. The company's polished mask was cracking, but it offered him no comfort. The price of truth was isolation, and every step reminded him he had traded safety for honesty. Reporters crowded outside David's house, cameras flashing like lightning. He stepped onto the porch, blinded by their shouts. "Are you the whistleblower? Do you regret testifying?" He raised a hand, but his voice cracked. "I only told the truth." Laura pulled Emma back inside, shielding her from the frenzy. David felt exposed, every part of his private life stripped away. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, whispers rippling across the street. The truth had set him free from silence, but chained him to public judgment. he muttered to himself. There's no going back. Weeks later, David walked alone through a quiet park. Autumn leaves scattered across the path, their crunch beneath his shoes echoing like ghosts. He sat on a bench, watching families laugh and children play, a world untouched by his storm. He whispered, "Was it worth it?" His phone buzzed. A message from Martin the lawyer. "The investigation is widening. They're falling apart." Relief flickered but didn't erase the loneliness. David looked at the sky, torn between pride and grief. The truth had burned his world, but it also lit a path no one could extinguish. Late at night, David stood at the window of his home, staring out at the dark street. The house was quiet, Laura and Emma asleep upstairs. He touched the glass, whispering, "The cost is mine to bear." His reflection looked older, wearier, but his eyes carried a stubborn fire. Outside, the street lamp flickered, throwing his shadow long across the room. He knew his career was gone, his safety uncertain, but his conscience was unbroken. In the stillness, he whispered, "They can't bury the truth anymore." The words hung in the quiet night, a fragile victory carved from ruin. David sat in Martin's office, the late afternoon sun cutting through half-closed blinds, carving harsh lines across the desk. The resignation letter sat in front of him, cold and heavy, like a tombstone with his name etched across it. Martin leaned forward, his voice calm but unyielding. "If you sign this, they'll buy your silence. They'll bury your name under paperwork and pretend none of this ever happened." David's hands trembled as he touched the paper, the ink already bleeding guilt into his fingertips. His chest ached, caught between survival and principle. Laura's face flashed in his memory, her whispered plea, "You can't carry this alone." Emma's laughter rang like a bell, fragile and untainted, reminding him of why he began. David swallowed, whispering, "If I sign, I vanish. If I don't, they'll keep chasing me." Martin said quietly, "Either way, you've already exposed them. You've already changed the story." Silence filled the room like smoke, suffocating, inescapable. David closed his eyes, knowing this moment was no longer just about him, but about the echo his choices would leave. At the dining table that night, the letter sat unopened between them, like a weapon neither dared to touch. David stared at it, hollow-eyed, while Laura placed her hand gently over his. Her voice was steady but frayed, "Whatever happens, we're still here." His lips trembled, whispering, "I only wanted to keep you safe." Laura's eyes glistened, her whisper sharp with truth. "You did more than that, David. You gave them a voice when no one else would." Emma peeked from the hallway, clutching her teddy bear, her small face carved with questions too heavy for her years. David smiled weakly at her, but inside, guilt ripped through him like glass. He had dragged his family into the storm, but also carved a space where silence no longer reigned. Laura leaned closer, whispering, "You can't erase what you've done, and you shouldn't want to." The letter remained unopened, a choice hovering like a blade, its shadow stretching across their fragile peace. The next morning, David walked through the corporate lobby for the final time. His footsteps echoed against polished marble, hollow like a farewell bell. Colleagues lined the upper floors, watching from balconies, their silence more damning than words. Some looked with pity, others with cold relief. No one moved to stop him, no one dared to speak. The receptionist sat stiffly as David placed the sealed envelope before her. He whispered, "It's done," his voice trembling but resolute. She nodded without meeting his eyes, her silence a mirror of the company's cruelty. As he turned toward the glass doors, he felt the walls close behind him, the weight of years dissolving into air. Outside, the city bustled, unaware of the war fought inside these walls. For the first time, David realized he was no longer an employee, no longer a ghost in their machine. He was simply a man, scarred but unbroken, stepping into a world where survival would mean redefining himself. That evening, David sat on a weathered bench in the park, city lights flickering faintly through the trees. The air was cool, leaves rustling like whispers of ghosts around him. He clasped his hands, staring at the ground, whispering, "It was worth it." The words cracked in his throat, barely audible, but carried the weight of everything he had lost. Families passed nearby, their laughter warm, their lives untouched by the storm that had consumed his. He envied them, yet found strength in knowing his choices might protect them from shadows they would never see. His phone buzzed with a message from Martin. The investigation is widening. They're falling apart. For a fleeting second, relief surged through him. But as the wind carried away the autumn leaves, he knew victory was hollow. The cost was written in his silence, in the ache of separation from what once was normal. He leaned back, eyes closing, whispering again, "Worth it." The house was silent when the phone rang. David jolted awake in his dark bedroom, the glow of the screen cutting through the shadows. Unknown number. His hand hovered, chest tightening with every shrill tone. Laura stirred faintly beside him, Emma asleep down the hall. The ringing grew louder in the stillness, echoing like a warning bell. David's breath hitched, whispering, "It never ends." He stared at the screen until it finally went dark, silence collapsing back into the room. His heart pounded, sweat dampening his shirt. He sat at the edge of the bed, face in his hands, whispering, "But I'd do it again." The words carried no triumph, only resolve. A defiance carved out of scars. Outside, the street lamp flickered against his window, his shadow stretching across the floor. The world had taken everything it could, but his voice remained. The silence that followed was his final victory, heavy, unshakable, eternal.